Willie T here in North Ayrshire, Scotland. Don't have much of a preterist research institute, but I do have my morning coffee, which is now stone cold because it's like 7 p.m. But it's still coffee flavored, you know. So I watched the Chris Date versus Don Preston debate on the resurrection of the dead the other night, and yeah, I was thoroughly entertained by it. I thought it was quite a good debate. I thought it went all right. I think anyone who understands a little bit about these interlocutors would expect the debate to, go as it did. I've noticed Don does a show with a guy, Mike Sullivan, and on Facebook, Mike Sullivan was a little taken aback with Chris Date. Mike thought that Chris was a little exuberant, a little ostentatious, a little bit of a menace, just disrespectful. But I must be quite hardened or just a bit jaded about the expectations of full preterist opponents. I've seen it time and again when people from a position that's historically more orthodox consider themselves superior in a way that produces incongruity. What I mean by that is that when Christians come together, I expect a high degree of respect and congeniality and brotherly affection between these two men. That's not quite what we got. We got the semblance of respect, but you could see that there was some digging and digs and sharpness there, And, I'm a full preterist with a lot of time and respect for Don Preston. That's my bias. So I think I'll probably be a harsher critic on Chris Date just by that alone. But I did feel there was a couple of times where Chris, could have been a bit more cordial, let's say, I don't see Don as a particularly disrespectful man. I think he's quite a respectful and wise person, and he's got a nice uncle type vibe to him, I know I look like Chris Tate, but listen, let me take the glasses off, right? Let me just change that. I try my best to change that. But yeah, first of all, I thought that there was an unfair advantage to Chris Date because his name is Christ Date. I don't unsubscribe. I'm sorry, but that's a great name. See if you've got to go into a debate where timing is part of it, being called Christ Date. I mean, that's just poetic, isn't it? So I'm going to look more into what Chris said, other than try and pick through what Don does, because Don does Don. I mean, he does really well. He's the OG, right? But Chris is new to me. So Chris struck me as quite a courageous thinker at first. I'm being charitable because he didn't just go along with whatever he was being told in church. He has this rethinking hell project. And with that, he's critiqued the interpretation of hell as some kind of eternal conscious torment. And he comes from a tradition of Calvinism, I believe. I may be wrong, but I think he's reformed, right? I hate all these names in Christianity. He's a reformed I don't know what that means. But he, he's a free thinker. He's willing to walk in less trodden paths. So I respect that. And I thought that, this is a debate. No one's coming here with a pure open mind. People are going to be quite grounded in their conclusions, and that's fair. That's fine. But I do often, I don't know, I get uncomfortable when Christians seem to lack the essence of Christianity. I mean, throw all the words away, throw all the debates away. At the end of the day, man, it's not ideas, it's not the phonetic sounds I'm going to make out my mouth that unlock salvation. It's about a relationship and reconciliation. And where that's lacking, call yourself whatever you want, but it doesn't matter. We're supposed to, I think it's supposed to be like this. Love, that says love above all. I put it there because that part of the cabinet here was in the way, and I was just going to use that to mask it, but you can't see it anymore. Anyway, so to get to Chris's debate, so Chris had a number of criteria, okay? And I quite liked his presentation. I thought it was quite succinct and easy to understand. Something you want to do if you're trying to convey information is have a learning intention, and you should want people to always remember what the learning intention is, okay, which I'm bad at. I like to go down rabbit holes and talk a lot of mince here and there. But Chris, quite straightforward. So he talked about history, Christology, anthropology, eschatology, and parsimony. I love that word, parsimony. It just kind of means like the economy and finesse of an argument. It's like Occam's razor, if you will. So on history, he makes appeals to authority, which is, I've got nothing against an appeal to authority. You know what I mean? Like if you want to look at what the experts say, feel free to do that. And from his perspective, it's what the early church fathers are saying. It's what the church has classically held to be the orthodox position. So he says that the resurrection of the flesh is central to orthodoxy, and that's under his historical argument. He talks about the non-physical resurrection of the sort Dawn and myself would profess. He speaks of that being novel and new, something you don't see until the 1800s, the late 1800s. Then, under the banner of Christology, he talks about first fruits. So Jesus is said to be the first of many raised like he was. He talks about union. The saints are promised a resurrection body like that of Christ's. He talks about how it's physical. Okay, the resurrection of Jesus was that of a physical body. He then talks about anthropology. So he talks about creation, the living creature. Man is physical, and that's called very good. He talks about death. That's not good. He talks about restoration, how the tree of life returns at the end for Jew and Gentile saints. And then he talks about resurrection there, rising to lasting physical life. He then talks about eschatology, again touching on creation. The natural world was first created sinless and peaceful, and that was very good. He talks about futility, how the natural world was plunged into futility due to sin. And then restoration, the saints are resurrected, likened to the restoration of nature. And then at the return. So this restoration awaits the risen Jesus' return from heaven. And then finally, just on parsimony, he says that it's a simple, elegant way to look at it, his way. A physical resurrection, just like Christ, okay? We have the historical attestation of the early church fathers and stuff like that who preached this. The saints are just raised like Jesus was physically. And God's design for humanity is that they be embodied physically. So I thought about that, and I thought from Chris Date's frame, from the perimeter of his ideological window, what it encompasses, he's presented his case fairly well. He has. That's the way you see it when you've got blinkers on. But kind of, that's the way I see it. I think Chris is looking at this thing with blinkers on. And it's not to say that Chris is some kind of blind, unintelligent person. He's clearly not. He's clearly a learned man. And, you know, he's clearly a free thinker, but he's operating within the confines of what he understands to be a particular orthodoxy, that if he should step outside, he would become a heretic. And I don't know if he sees it this way, but his social capital would be greatly reduced. And Don Preston knows something about that. The exchange of social capital for truth and pursuing what you believe to be earnestly true. I'm not saying that Chris doesn't believe this to be earnestly true, but I think perhaps his striving to remain within orthodoxy, that's a small O orthodoxy, what humanity has conceived and contrived. To stay and remain firm within that, he has an ideological stumbling block, and that is physicalism or materialism. Okay? And I think that's where futurism comes to its black hole, this inescapable gravity that just draws the futurist in towards this center of physicalism. And it's so hard to escape because the preterist will often be accused of spiritualizing. You spiritualized the text. Well, one of the things that Don was accused of was something akin to cherry picking. But as Don said to Chris, as a reformed individual, you're not against biblical synthesis. And I think that's fine. Don is very good with his biblical synthesis. He's not picking cherries. He is putting themes together, recurrent themes. Okay? Don talks about the typological fulfillments, and you look back in the Old Testament, you look at Israel, you look at the narrative and the story, and I think Don has a very elegant story. Chris wants to talk about the parsimony of his affirmation that the resurrection is physical. But I find that is not elegant. I find that lacks explanatory power. I think the real explanatory power is found in full-blown preterism, right? We're not talking about partial preterism. We're talking about full-blown preterism. I don't know why people call it that. Some people call it that. It's weird, but I think it's funny. Because the narrative is clear. Now, one of the things that Chris does is he takes, which I think is a good point, he talks about how you have the nature of the resurrection texts and how preterists will think that they have to be reconciled with timing. I think that's perfectly true. Whatever the nature of the resurrection is, it does need to be reconciled with timing. However, Chris believes that the timing texts, they need to be seen through the lens of the nature texts. So whatever the nature of the resurrection is, that's primacy. That's the foundation right there. And then whatever your conclusions you come to about the nature of the resurrection, then you go back to the timing and you tinker with the clock to make it fit. Now, does that not sound ass backwards? That sounds totally backwards to me. When I could quote 100, I could do it right now. I could do it right now. But I've got a video where I give 101 reasons to be a preterist. Okay, 101 time statements. Okay, all pointing towards the 1st century, particularly, not all of them, but a lot of them are thematically linked. And Don K. Preston makes this point that the time of the resurrection is at the end. And I've got videos on that. And I think that the timing statements are so heavy. They're so weighty. They're so unmissable that you shouldn't bypass them. You should use timing for organization. You shouldn't go to work out, right, I'm going to look at the nature of the resurrection and come up with an idea of it, especially when the timing would point you in a different direction. You know, I find that very odd, but I understand why you would do it. You would do it that way to try and fit within orthodoxy. And that's something that came across as very important for Chris, because he did stand on the shoulders of the early church fathers, of early theologians. And hey, that's a good tradition to stand on. I'm not going to trash these people. I think that there's wisdom there. But I think that he, in trying to stay within an orthodoxy, blinds himself to the full potential of his intellectual capacity. I think he limits himself, and I think it's easy done. And you know, he's the kind of person that would scoff at the idea of, well, are you trying to say that all these people have been wrong? Are you trying to say that for, you know, over 1,900 years that there's just been error? And what we need to remember there is that no, I don't think that's the way to see it. Because ultimately, what is right, it goes back to that. That's what's right. Okay, that's it there. All these big intellectual ideas, they're by the by. See, real people, real punters, real individuals like you and me. I'm not talking about theologians. I'm not talking about councils of Nicaea and all that, right? These people who get to write down in ink and paper and record all their findings and stuff like that. Like, that's fine for science, okay? Because the science of this world is like Lego, and whatever fits and works, and that's good, and we need that to build a basis up. But see, when it comes to spiritual stuff, see, when it comes to relationship with God, that's between you and God. That's between real people. And what we do in our lives, that's what's important. It's not about our thesis. It's not about our creed. It's about the life that we lived. And that can be connected to creeds and stuff. Of course it can. But what I'm saying is the most important aspect there would be the life that you live. Because at the end of the day, you are not given a theology test. The great judgment is not religious education 101. It's how did you interact with the people in your sphere of influence? How did you love? How did you live? What were the quality of your relationships? How did you endure hardship? What was your worst point? What was your best point? Who were you? That's important. That's the stuff that matters. So, and remember, a big point, they missed Jesus in the flesh, right? They missed Jesus in the flesh. They crucified Jesus in the flesh. So if there was some kind of more subtle return of Jesus, some invisible return of Jesus that was qualitatively different, then how much more would people miss that? But of course, the missing of that is an interesting idea, because I don't believe you do miss it if you live the good life. No, if you embody the fruits of the Spirit and do those things that are obviously good, living according to your conscience, living according to love, then you fulfill God's desire for your life. And I think that's a very powerful point. And I don't think it's given enough airtime. And I don't think it's given enough respect. Because that's the kind of thing, see, if I said that in a debate with Chris Day, I know he would kind of scoff at that idea, even though he'd think, are you trying to imitate me? You trying to, with the grey in your beard and with the glasses and stuff? I'm Chris, no, I'm not imitating you. I'm not trying to be you. But yeah, I think he would scoff at it. And I think that's a dang shame. I think it's a real shame. So yeah, I was not surprised by anything that I heard. I thought that Don did a good job of presenting the information as he should. The level of respect or disrespect between Don and Chris, that's water off a duck's back for me. Again, I say Michael Sullivan, he was taken aback by the disrespect that he perceived from Chris. But see, to be honest with you, I don't even register that kind of stuff anymore. I just take it as par for the course. Um, and I would be surprised if Don was any different. I remember messaging Don 10 years ago, asking him about that, because I saw some really catty interactions. And he's just like, you can't let it get to you. Well, obviously, it will in the heat of the moment. Those kinds of things will stir you up. There was a point in the debate where Don asked Chris to throw up his chart on parsimony. And Chris did this thing where he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. What chart on parsimony? And it was obvious what Don was asking, right? And you can debate whether or not Don can ask someone else to throw up a slide that they have, right? But I just thought that interaction was so funny and just so typical of the kind of energy that these debates can bring. And again, I feel that comes from this place of assumed supremacy from those who walk within orthodoxy. But isn't it always the way, usually, that God will subvert expectation? And we should not be so haughty. We should be in expectation of being humbled whenever we are, seeing ourselves as, super people or, totally right. I'm so righteous. I think we need to be a bit more humble with these kinds of debates. It's not going to happen. Sam Frost is a name that people will know. Now, there's a guy on YouTube that I've watched a couple of his videos. Fenley Ward or something like that. I don't know a lot about it. I think he's got some nice sermons and stuff. I've maybe watched one or two and found them quite nice and entertaining. He seems like quite a jovial character. And he was interviewing some guy, Wilson, Doug Wilson, I think his name was. And there must have been some controversy in Doug Wilson's church. Now, I'm here in rural Scotland. I don't know what's happening in America, and I don't know who these people are, okay? But the comment section was just like, oh, well, this guy's a sexual predator weirdo, and this guy's a slime ball, and it was all this kind of like gossipy stuff that, I mean, fair dues. If there's some serious allegations going on in some churches, you might wonder, what does that tell you about the climate and the atmosphere there? Is there something that needs to be worked out? But I think we ultimately need to be careful of ad hominem, to go after the person, and we need to look at the quality of an argument, and that is the same for the life lived. Look at the quality of the life lived. Look at the quality of the argument. I think that's a good way of moving forward there. So I don't really have much more to add to that. If I was to go through a couple of things now, just if I was to look at the different points that Chris Date made and answer them off the cuff, totally dangerous, man. But let's try it. So on the point of history, Chris Date invokes orthodoxy like an absolute clown. Okay, I'm joking. I don't think an appeal to orthodoxy has spiritual cojones. No, all I'm saying is it doesn't have spiritual power. Okay, if you're going to invoke the conceptions of man and be like, well, here's this pathetic thing. It's like, well, what does the scripture say? First and foremost, what does Jesus Christ say? That's powerful. But if you're going to invoke creeds and such, then, I mean, couldn't the Pharisees have done that back in their day, the hypocritical Pharisees? And so would you be like, oh, well, the Pharisees correct. I better listen to the Pharisee instead of what this wishy-washy Jesus person's saying, because the Pharisee stands on tradition, whereas Jesus, oh man, some of the stuff he's saying has a grounding in the text, in the scripture, but I don't know, he's shooting for the hip. So I don't think an appeal to orthodoxy is all that. Okay, dare I say. Okay, and he has this orthodoxy being the resurrection of the flesh is central. Well, it can be central and wrong. Okay, and anyone who is Protestant, anyone who's a Calvinist, understands that there can be error in the past, right? Because you've come out of a tradition of protesting that which has come before. This is just protesting that wee bit more. That's all it is. You just need to protest a little bit more, Chris. Chris talks about novelty, the first century non-physical resurrection being an idea first heard in 1878. Now, Don makes a couple of allusions historically to an early church father in another writing, where it would seem that a non-physical resurrection was talked about. I don't have the sources for that, but I feel like the idea of non-physical resurrection, it is there in the text. You know, you die physical, you rise a spiritual being. Okay, the things that are incorruptible are invisible. You know what I mean? I feel like we're being led by the hand to be open to the idea of a non-physical resurrection. So that's what I would say on that. Okay, now Christology was his second point. First fruits. Jesus said to be first of many, raised like he was. Well, you come back to the question of like he was, and the fact that Christ was raised as a sign. Now, Don made the point in the debate that signs do not point to themselves. Signs are signifiers. Signs have this semiotic meaning. And I think that the sign there, the likeness, was the idea that yes, there is life that will endure after death. To die is gain. This day you will be with me in paradise. These kinds of ideas. The saints are promised a resurrection body like that of Christ. Well, they talk about the spiritual body, don't they? Physical. The resurrection of Jesus was that of a physical body. You know, you can go very deep on this, talking about types and forms. I think you could, if I was going to do like a fanciful poetic sermon, I might talk about how the baptism of Christ was a resurrection. I know, like a type of resurrection, when you come out of those waters and then the Spirit of God descended upon Jesus like a dove and remained with him. That's a type of resurrection. That's a coming to life imagery, right? You could say that the wiser man with great perception, and get the glasses on, would say, there's the resurrection at that point there. Kind of, not really, but you know what I mean? You can make an argument for that. So, anthropology, okay, was that study of humanity, humans? So he talks about creation in this point, anthropology. So man is a physical creature. Okay, now, is man a physical creature in the New Age? I remember Jesus answering a question about this, and it was about, hey, look, I'm married to this woman who was married to my brother who's dead. How are we going to work this out in the afterlife? And Jesus is like, well, in the kingdom of heaven, it won't be like this. You won't be given husband and wife and etc. You'll be like the angels. Be like the angels. So there's something to be said about that. And I think that if I was to put that to Christie, he would have some spiritual interpretation of that or whatnot. some nuanced interpretation of that. And that's all I want to keep alive, is the idea of nuanced interpretation. Okay. Talks about death being bad. Okay. But what kind of death, Chris? What kind of death? Let the dead bury the dead. What does that mean? On this day you will surely die. Or the day you eat of the fruit you will surely die. What does that mean? Is there a kind of death beyond physical death from which people are being saved? Well, the inference is absolutely yes. And you would have to be very obtuse to miss that point. You would have to be a clown. Like, I'm not like that. After all the stuff I was saying, love about all, I'm not like that. So yeah, resurrection, tree of life returns at the end for a Jew and Gentile. Absolutely, I believe that. We all can drink freely now of the water of the river of life. Resurrection, rising to lasting physical life. No, I don't think it means to suggest that it's lasting physical life. Eschatology. So the natural world was sinless and peaceful at creation, and this was very good, but then sin came in and plunged it into futility. The restoration is the saints being restored with nature. So he has this eschatological view of the world becoming this Eden again, and then man, Adam and Eve, being restored, if you will, to whatever nature they were supposed to be restored to. I don't know what his opinion is on Adam and Eve, because I would say Adam and Eve were created mortal, right? I would say that they were going to perish. They never had the fruit of the tree of life. And then again, I did speak about parsimony. He talks about God's design for humans as physical embodiment, but I go back to the scriptures that suggest that it's invisible things that are incorruptible, that we are said to become. We're said to be, like angels in the kingdom of heaven, whatever that should mean. I think it alludes to something spiritual. So that's me firing off the cuff, right? Heavy stuff, guys, heavy stuff, you know what I mean? So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you for joining. That's just my thoughts on it. Ultimately, did I think that Chris was totally disrespectful and stuff like that? I didn't feel that as much. Was he disrespectful? Probably. But was he so disrespectful that I found it remarkable? No. But maybe that's just because I'm too cynical now, you know? And I felt like Don did a great job. And yeah, I don't know if there'd been much point of those two guys having another debate. I don't think it would interest anyone, to be honest. I don't think there was the right kind of connection between these two people, be it fiery or otherwise. But I look forward to seeing Don, put forward his ideas again in a debate. I don't know who with, because that was a surprise. I didn't know that debate was happening. That it just so happened to be a good time for me to watch in the UK. Anyway, thank you for watching this little video. If you have any thoughts on that debate, or if you felt like anything I'd said is, dislodged something you want to share, please share. And ultimately, guys, I would just remind you to, just walk in love. Let's try and refine ourselves. Let's try and be good people to the best of our ability. Don't get too down. Don't get too down. I've been struggling a little bit with mental health and stuff like that over the last couple of months, but it ain't all so bad. It ain't all so bad. In fact, it's pretty fine. It's pretty beautiful. All the best, guys. God bless. I'll see y'all later.